welcome councillors.
That's residents, don't try and make.
Nothing complaint. Welcome councillors to council meeting, special meeting of Wednesday the 21st of April. We acknowledge traditional custodians of this land and pay respect to their elders and the elders from other communities who may be here today. We also acknowledge all other people who have contributed to the rich diversity of this country. Council, would you be upstanding for the statement of interest, please? I declare
But as the council of Ellenborough City, I will undertake on every occasion to carry out my duties to the best interests of the community, and that my conduct shall maintain the standards of our council's code of conduct, so that I may faithfully represent and uphold the trust placed in council by the people of Benalla District.
Thank you. I'll remind you that the meetings are recorded and live streamed. Your behaviour is expected to be exemplary, as it always is. Under the Local Government Act of 2020, anyone with a conflict of interest should declare that conflict now. Does anyone have any conflict in the agenda? Okay, apologies. Do we have any apologies? No. Question time. Any questions? No. Petitions? No. Reports by officers? No. Authorisation of signing and sealing of documents. 7.2, proposed budget. Kathy Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. As you know, we've had a number of workshops going for the last 4 or 5, well, we've had 5 workshops going through for the last few months, and we've come to the final end of the process. And I'm happy to say that we have arrived at our budget for next year and for the following 3 years as part of the new Act. We cover 4-year budgets. As our meeting at the last workshop, workshop 5, we have undertaken a few reviews of some items in the budget, and we have accordingly altered the employee costs for the year 22-23. They've dropped down to 12,135 now because the Working for Victoria impact of the grant has been taken out in the future years. So that's good. We've also had a little bit of movement on some other expenses, which included in the 4th year, the allowance for a council election at the end of the 4th year. And after review, we've brought that back to 667 rather than, I can't see what it was, 7 something in it. So the surplus for the 4 years runs for next year. It's a surplus for 2.327 million. My new figures come in at a deficit of 2.305 million. It goes to 2.253 in the next year, and the final year now goes to 2.972 deficit rather than the figures that we talked about at workshop 5. So that's a positive in my opinion. It's brought it under the 3 mil, so that's good. And the impact in the balance sheet of movements between those things, and also the recognition of assets, and we had a bit of movement on the amortisation of the airspace, has brought us back to a cash balance at the end of 24-25 of 9.7 million, which previously was a different figure, which is in the balance sheet in the 24-25 year. So there's been a little bit of movement between those. Overall, we've got a lot of work to do. We know that, but next year is a big year. We've got a very large capital works program of $11.1 million, which I think is exciting for the community, and it's funded heavily by grants, which is a great outcome. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Kathy?
Firstly, Kathy, you mentioned some different figures to what I'm seeing on this report. Is that right?
Yep.
There have been some
Councillor
changes.
Generate, you just stand.
Oh, sorry, I can't do that.
That's good. Thank you, Chair. The figures that you presented is a bit different to what I see on this report. So do you suggest there will be a different report to this one?
The figures will come out in your package on Friday, am I correct?
Mr Chair, there will be, this report was only for information purposes, there will be noted. The actual full budget will be submitted next Wednesday at an unscheduled council meeting prior to the Assembly of Council. So councillors will have the full package on Friday.
Are there any other questions of Kathy?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Kathy, public submission, when does the draft budget go out for public submission? Is that next week? Thank you.
So you, Mr Chair, that'll be on Thursday following if it's the budget is accepted next Wednesday evening, or go out starting from Thursday for public comment.
Thank you.
Councillor Firth.
Through the chair, possibly this is more for the CEO with regards to the state of capital works. Down the middle of the page, we've got infrastructure drainage, $157,000 this year, but 21-22 is $1.044 million. Can you elaborate on that $1 million being spent on drainage, please?
Thank you. Through the chair, we're very fortunate. The drainage work in both this year and next year is being fully funded. The $150,000 is a combination of money that was set aside by the council, which is our recurring $25,000 each year, and there's also the Devonish Drain, which we're still designing at the moment. So that project will get underway once the redesign has been undertaken. Next year, councillors may recall, we were successful this year in receiving an additional fund through the Australian government, $975,000 for the Local Community Road Infrastructure Fund, LRCI. Next year, there's $1,019,000 that's actually been allocated to the Benalla Rural City Council. We're currently scoping up 2 major drainage projects at the moment, and our intention is to deliver those in next year's budget. And given the significance and the desire of previous councils to spend some significant dollars on the drainage network, our intention is to spend the bulk of that money on that particular network. So once again, very fortunate to have some money come our way, and I think it's prudent of the council to address some of the drainage issues in and around town.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the budget for the capital infrastructure budget, the footpaths and cycleways, we have allocated 0.56% from 22 to 2025. But actually, I looked at other neighbouring councils of similar sizes like Stratbogie, 2% for an example, Indigo Shire, 13.6. It seems like there's a lot of work going on there. And Moira Shire, 1.65, Wangaratta, 2.2, and Shepparton, 1.61. That's as percentage of the rates revenue. So what's the rationale behind we being the lowest council given the priority for footpaths and cycleways in terms of this budget?
Through the chair, thank you for the question, councillor. I think it has been a difficult one, and some of the councillors that have served on previous councils will know this probably better than I do. But probably 5 years ago, this council allocated very little funds to the footpath and road network, or the bike path. Probably somewhere around $10,000, maybe $15,000 a year. There was a study completed, I think it was about 2017. There were a number of recommendations through that there. At the time, I think it was about December 2017, the council accepted the report and moved a recommendation to commit about $100,000 to address a number of the projects identified as a priority 1. There are a number of those particular projects still outstanding at this particular point in time. And from memory, I think there's about 5 projects delivered. Some of those were line marking of bicycle ways, some were to address pram crossings, some were to widen footpaths. And a lot of the other ones remaining to do with probably should do. Inside that report, there was also what they call priority action 2 and a priority action 3. So those were to be sort of reviewed no later than September 2022. And at that particular point in time, a decision of the council was to reassess that, obviously look at adopting that particular strategy for another 5 years, and then continuing to work on our particular road network. Inside that document, there was one particular comment that whilst the recommendations were there, it was to be determined by the council on how the money was to be spent. Since 2017, I stand to be corrected, but I will be guided by the previous council, is that the priorities have shifted somewhat because of the growth that Fenella is currently experiencing. A lot of the footpath expenditure has gone into those areas for connectivity. Thomas Street, Carmen Street, Bond Street, and a few of those, not Bond Street, a few of those other ones as well. So the priorities sort of shifted a little bit away from what the report was into the urgency at the time and what the council has. And it's safe to say that the council adopted an approach of allocating $100,000 to $125,000 each year for footpath and cycleway improvements. And I think over the next period of time, we will reassess that particular document, the currency of that, the outstanding works. And I think in this year's budget, we've got about $128,000 set aside for the work. We haven't determined exactly where that will be spent, but I would think that some of those items that have been identified as a priority 1 may get picked up this year, but being mindful that we've got growth areas that need to be addressed as well. Otherwise, we fall into the same situation as I think 6-7 weeks ago. We're having a development, I think it was in Mary Street, having part of a footpath complete, and we don't complete them for many, many, many years. So in not only this council, but in future councils next year, the year after, and the year after, I think there will be a much more concerted effort to look at addressing the footpath and the bicycle way strategies. But at the moment, I think we've allocated what we can afford to at this particular point in time, but very mindful that those connectivities and those pathways, there's many, many around town that we need to connect and to address issues around.
Thank you. Justin.
Councillor Firth.
Yeah, I'll probably address this to the CEO again through the chair with regards to, given that Benalla and a number of regional cities and towns are going through unprecedented growth, and infrastructure in those towns and communities will need to be addressed to, and the budgets will have to go up to accordingly. Is there any signs of federal or state governments, and I don't want to put you on the spot, however, I think it's timely to make a point that infrastructure spending in the regional areas of Victoria, let alone other states, has to be addressed from a state and federal government level. Do we see any signs of that coming so that we will be able to spend the amount of monies on footpaths, drainage, so forth, and continue all the good services that every council delivers at a local government level? I know that's a big question, but is there any signs, I suppose?
Through the chair, it's a difficult one, and the short answer is that conversation happens all the time. I think you look at peri-urban areas are very good at advocating and lobbying to get services and more money spent in those areas just by the nature of growing populations. What we're finding recently in Benalla in particular over the last 3 years is there's a significant level of interest coming here. And so we've probably just started that conversation. And when I have the opportunity, I'm always sort of saying to government, we're a growing community, we need infrastructure. Drainage is a massive one, obviously. But just the basic necessities of footpaths and cycleways, just for the amenity, additional services in itself. So it's a conversation that we continue to have, and at every chance, like I said, you give this community $10 million and we could put that all into drainage, we can put into services, we can put into additional sporting facilities, and we can put into path and roadways. But it's a very interesting question, but it's not a simple answer.
I wasn't expecting that.
No, and as council is aware, one of our greatest things that we need to address is our landfill. And, as I explained previously, this current SRP soaks up a lot of our cash in that particular line item. But we're thinking we're making inroads in there to release some of those funds that we can further invest into other areas throughout, the community.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Dom, for the answer about footpaths and the pathways to the future project or the strategy. One question I have is that strategy particularly addresses the safety issues. The reason that report for the strategy was done because of the crashes, or the cyclist crashes we had in 2000 from 9 to 13. Is there any legal liability if we don't meet that strategy, and if someone crashes, or if there were any injuries or deaths for this council?
Just through the chair, I may take that on notice because of the nature of the response that I may have to give. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Gilmore.
I have a couple of more questions. And going back to the capital infrastructure project, the budget, I noticed 50% of the capital infrastructure line, the budget goes to waste management. And that's where we spend our money on footpaths, roads, and all that. But 50% of that goes to waste management. So what is the rationale behind it? And that's actually the disappropriate to compare to other councils, similar sizes in our region. So again, what's the rationale, and is there a problem in that, or is that something we should address differently without taking money from the rates?
It's just through the chair. One of the things to be mindful of is not to compare council with council. We are a council that manages and runs the landfill, Strathbogie in Mansfield, two neighbouring councils that actually don't do that. So whilst Shepherd and Moira and Wangaratta do, Wodonga doesn't, Indigo doesn't, Alpine Shire doesn't, Mansfield and Strathbogie don't. In our particular case, going back a number of years ago, GHD actually commissioned a report to be done on a landfill master plan. So that plan was done, and that's essentially our Bible. We have to stick by that. And so the auditors hold us to account each year. And given the significant dollars that are attached to landfill construction, rehabilitation costs, gas extraction, aftercare costs, we have to prove each year that as a council and as a community, we're actually setting aside those provisions and making allowances in our balance sheet and our P&L to actually construct landfill cells and allocate funds for rehabilitation. So what you see in the report today and what you'll see in the final report next week is what is presented in the GHD report. So we can sit there with the auditors hand on heart and say, well, yes, that's the audit report says this, and now you can look at our financials and we've got that in there. As councillors are aware, we've challenged some of the assumptions in the GHD report. We're just waiting for the final approval on the construction of what we call Cell 3A and 3B, and the rehab on stage 1 and also rehab on stage 2A. If those assumptions actually come back, we'll go back in and rewrite that master plan with what we call the state of play as it is today, addressing a lot of the issues that we've been identified and we've taken guidance from. So what I would suspect is once that has been approved and we know what the new way forward is, those values that we've got in our financials, the SRP and even the longer term 10-year plan may change significantly. And the GHD report, we would be able to go back in and rewrite that because it has cell sequencing, it has cell construction dates, it has rehabilitation construction dates, and all these things that have dates applied to it. And so our main aim here is to actually look at number one, challenging that and actually saying, okay, from a community of our size, we cannot continue to be encumbered by this massive cost. And if there are opportunities for us to challenge those assumptions and work out a way forward that actually lessens the impact financially on our community, then we have to do that as a council. And we're a long way forward in that process. 18 months ago, we accepted those things and we're moving forward. We're in a position today to sit there and say, we're a long way forward and we think we've got solutions that may actually change that master plan going forward. So I know when you look at that from an elected member perspective, you go, wow, there's a lot of money tied up there, Don. But keep in mind, and I know I've told the council this quite a few times, I have to put that there because the auditors hold us to account, but we're working on our way forward to release those funds that we can actually commit to other projects.
Thank you, Don.
Any other questions on the budget?
One last question, with the capital expenditure to the chair, what is the ratio that we have allocated to rural townships and to Benalla town? Is there a ratio on that for projects?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair again, it's always a difficult question, this one, how much we sort of allocate. The council traditionally doesn't have what you'd call many assets in the townships other than some footpaths and some parks and some toilets and things like that there. A lot of the councils spend in what you call the rural areas or townships are largely tied to the road network and obviously the connectivity back into town and those types of items. When you look at what the budget is, R2R traditionally goes to the rural roads, around about $1.2 million. Our grading, obviously predominantly in the rural areas, the road sealing, shoulder grading, between those two items alone, somewhere around $1.6 and $2 million. Obviously, we maintain a lot of parks and public toilets in the rural townships as well. And I noted one before in Devonish, when an opportunity came up, we grabbed that funding and we'll look to address the amenity of Devonish through rebuilding a drain. From time to time, communities will come forward and request of council to do certain things. That obviously goes into the consideration. When we have our asset management plans done by 3rd of June next year, to remember the dates, throughout that whole process, and when we go to do our 10-year plans, that's when we can sit there as a council, hand on heart, and say, okay, all the assets of the council, this is when we should be spending money. So at the moment, the bulk of what we do in those townships and rural areas, it really is tied to the road network and some drainage, a lot of cleanup and that type of stuff, as opposed to what we do in the Benalla Township, where we're developing, that central location for people to come in and enjoy the amenity of the town itself as a central hub.
Thank you, Don.
Councillor Firth?
I'd just like to move the motion.
Oh, okay. If there's no other questions, recommendations of report be noted.
I'll second that.
Okay, move Councillor Firth, second Councillor Davis. I'd like to speak, Councillor Firth.
Absolutely, at every opportunity, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to recommend this report being noted to the council. And one thing I did want to say was, sitting here after many years of listening to questions being answered by our staff and so forth, what I think this is, between what Kath and Dom and the rest of the staff have put together, is really a plan for the future going forward. This is accounting with some of the big problems that have been addressed and discussed. And I'm glad some of the questions from councillors today has given the CEO an opportunity to answer very clearly and basically set out our pathway to a far better financial situation in 4 years' time. Yes, this shows us there's going to be some difficult times ahead, but our biggest issue is those infrastructure things such as the landfill and drainage, and so that we can then redirect monies that we have. It's just at the moment having to go to one place that has been neglected over many years. And I thank the staff for actually putting this plan together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor First. Councillor Davis?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just following on from my colleague, I think the Manager of Finance summed it up. It's going to be a hard budget. It's going to have to be a disciplined budget, a discipline for staff to stay on track. Having sat through 15 of these budgets, I think this is possibly the best one that I've seen. I won't get shot down by another fellow councillor many years ago saying council's core business is roads, rates and rubbish. I mean, we all know it's more than that. However, at the end of the day, our biggest costs are roads and rubbish. And we're in a situation now, and I'm part of the problem years ago, where we didn't address enough money into the rubbish side of it, landfill. Our CEO's come on board 2 years ago, 18 months, 2 years he's been here. He's identified what has to happen there, and he's allocated the money. So we've allocated the money for rubbish, which is taken out of some other hand, because our rates is virtually a fixed cost, whereas our roads, our rubbish and roads are a moving cost, and they're not coming down. It was pleasing that someone mentioned how Benella's growing, and that we should be funding state and federal government for more money, which I'm sure the CEOs and staff are over. But it's pleasing that Kathy mentioned that capital works is mainly funded, grant funded. So we're not relying on our ratepayers to fund these capital projects. So that entitles us to put more money into just our basic running at costs of the business. I know that the CEO was right across when he spoke about country towns. People in the country don't want much. You know, they pay their share for the art gallery, the swimming pool and everything else. But really what they want is a reasonable road to come into town on. And I touched on that earlier today, where when it rains, we haven't got any gravel on our gravel roads. We're grading gravel, we're grading mud, we're grading clay up at the moment, and we're going to have to spend a lot of money on our gravel roads in the future. I won't go on much longer, but I think it's a responsible budget. It possibly doesn't allocate enough money to specific projects, but I mean, it's giving everybody footpaths, we're getting money spent. Unfortunately, we get a situation where someone's been living somewhere for 25 years and we still haven't got a footpath in front of their house. However, when you get somewhere like a new nursing home or expansion of the hospital, then we have to address extra trafficable facilities in those areas for the majority of the people. I think I've said enough. And I hope I'm standing here next year saying that we've completed what we've said we will complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Anyone else like to speak? Councillor King and Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just following on from my fellow councillors' comments, I look at this budget tonight, this afternoon, and the work that the council has put in, and it certainly does reflect a very conservative budget and a very conservative approach, considering what the council and the community have gone through in the last 12 months and certainly going forward. I acknowledge the CEO and his leadership and the General Manager and our Manager of Finance and the work that they've done in putting this together, because a lot of work goes into this, as we know, and my fellow councillors and the work that we've also done in getting it to this stage. And I'm very much looking forward to getting this out to the community and getting in front of them so that they can provide us with feedback and commentary in regards to their thoughts on this. And and working through this next step. But it's been an interesting process, this budget cycle. But as we can see, there's a lot of good work that's going to come out of this in the next 12 months within our community, which has been heavily funded by the state and federal government, and we thank them for that. And certainly we're going to see some really good infrastructure work in Benalla over the next 12 months. So no, I acknowledge and accept this document as it is.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's good to follow up from the fellow councillors, and answers I got for my questions from the CEO was very good, and it's hopeful that we have a plan with the landfill and where our money goes mostly. and probably look at the opportunities also to lobby this to the federal and state governments. I know that you have done that, a lot of other things with the grants, and give the opportunity for the community to have the amenities that they are asking for, very basic things. They're not luxuries. Footpath is not a luxury, and better roads network is not a luxury. So they're very basic things. So I hope that we can probably look at this in a different way and hear the community, as Justin, Councillor King suggested, and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Generato. Would anyone else like to speak? All those in favour? That's carried. Reports by councillors. Any councillor have a report? Councillor Generato.
Thank you, Chair. This report I meant to present for the last meeting, and I was an apology. So I would like to present on 10th March and 7th of April. I attended the Community Plan Implementation Steering Committee. CEO attended the meeting on 10th of March. There were a few changes. A local community member was appointed, Daniel Gray, as the chair. And then the committee decided to meet more frequently. Now the committee is having monthly meetings, especially to develop and support on the community vision and the council planning process. And the community working on reporting back to the community for the last 5 years on the community plan that's been implemented. And on 21st of March, I attended the International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination event organized by the community group at Women in the House. Basically discussed about how to educate people and the community in eliminating racial discrimination and supporting the UN Day celebration or marking that day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, councillor. Does anyone else have a report? If not, the recommendation on page 11 is that the reports be noted. Moved to Councillor Davis, second to Councillor King. Speak, Councillor Davis. Councillor King. Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? All those in favour? That's carried. Notices of motion. Notice of rescission motion. Bill, urgent business. Bill. There's a recommendation that the meeting be closed to the public for the consideration of confidential business items noted above pursuant to section 3 and sections 66 of the Local Government Act. So I'd like to move that. Councillor Hearn, Councillor King. All those in favour? That's carried.